guess we'll go ahead and get started. So first thing is I presented a few times at Pete and C, and so I'm a fan of the 2 feet rule. And if you don't know that yet, if you don't like the session, something's not going the way you expected, or it's just not what you wanted, feel free. You can use your 2 feet to go and find another presentation if you want. I don't want you to feel like you're wasting your time. So I'm not offended by that at all. Just feel free to do that in the middle of the presentation. Don't worry about offending me anyway. So I'm Tom Tansen, and I am a teacher in Bethlehem Area School District. I currently teach at Liberty High School. I previously taught at East Hills Middle School. I taught at the middle school level for 11 years, and this is my 2nd year at the high school level. So I have experience at middle and high school levels. And the stuff that I'm going to talk about today I've used with both levels, and it works. And I'm sure like a lot of this would apply to elementary as well, because it's very general. I like interactive sessions. I like to get you involved in things. So along the way, if you have a device, it's going to have you type in different bit.lys to get to the sheets that we're using, so that you can actually interact with what we're doing here, and I can show you how it's all working. And feel free to stop me at any point if I'm going too fast or if something doesn't make sense, or if you have advice or things that you do that relate to it, please share out. We're going to start off with the session. It's pretty simple stuff in Sheets, and as we go it gets more complicated. So that's the way it is. If you have experience with Sheets, the beginning stuff might be real easy for you, and then as we go, maybe it gets more complicated, or maybe you're familiar with all that. I hope that you're going to learn something new by being here today. So the goals of this session, I have a few ideas of what I'm trying to do. So speed up grading of open-ended questions. The thing about Google Sheets is if you do multiple choice or true and false, it grades it for you in a quiz form, but if you do open-ended, you're responsible for grading it. So I have tips and tricks for speeding that up a little bit. The second thing is to be able to give your students immediate feedback when answering questions in a Google Sheet assignment. So if you build an assignment in a Google Sheet, you could actually give them feedback immediately. And I'll show you how that works, and I'll also show you how I use that with my students. And then easily track your students' progress, so to be able to see where they're at and follow their growth. And then finally, use a standards-based grading system in a school district that uses traditional grading practices. I'm a huge fan of standards-based grading, and I had spent years trying to figure out how to make that work in a traditional grading system in our district. So the answer to that was Google Sheets, and I'll tell you more about that story as we get to that point of the presentation. But those are the goals for the session, and as I said, if there's anything that you want to add or ask questions, feel free to do that along the way. So the first thing is to show you how to speed up the grading of open-ended questions. So if you go to this bit.ly right here, that should take you to a Google form. And by you filling in the Google form, I'll be able to show you how I can quickly grade your open-ended answers. So if you notice, as you're filling in your Google form and submitting it, it's populating in the Google Sheet, and then some of the cells are turning green and some of them are not. And so the reason that is I have it looking for the keyword of Sheets. Since I'm giving a presentation on Google Sheets, I wanted to know how many people sitting in the session use Google Sheets to some degree. And so if you're answering Google Sheets, it's turning it green and automatically telling me that you do that. So I don't even have to look through specifically. I'm using conditional formatting for that, which I'll point out along the way. And this is nice if you, I teach biology, so when I have students write a response and I know that they have to include a certain vocabulary term, such as the nucleus of the cell, I'll tell the conditional formatting to look for the word nucleus, or whatever else I'm looking for. And so it will automatically turn it green if they have it, and it won't turn it green if they don't. And the idea is that while I still need to go through and scan their answers, I can see right away if the word nucleus isn't there. So then I know that person didn't include what I needed them to include. So that question, obviously, that answer is not correct. But the green ones, just because they include nucleus doesn't mean they include it right or correctly. So I have to go in and check that. But it at least speeds it up. I can rule out the ones that didn't even use the word nucleus if I'm requiring that word to be there. Questions about that idea? Do you want me to show you how to do conditional formatting? Do you know how to do that? You want to show?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you highlight it different colors?
Yes. So let's say, so what you do is you just select whatever your cells you want. So in this case, if I want to just do it in this column, I'll select this column, and then if you go under Format, there's conditional formatting. And you can set up the rules. So if I want to set up another rule, it's going to say what range you're applying it to, and then you can change whatever you want it to be. So right now it's like format the cell if it's not empty. If I want to say it's exactly a term, so I would say text is exactly. If I want to say nucleus as my answer, then I can choose whatever color I want it to be. I choose green for correct and red for incorrect. If I do, you'll see as we go, I do different levels, so there'll be green, yellow, red, or purple, green, yellow, red to do the advanced proficient, and so forth. So you can do it that way too. You can set up multiple rules, and then that way it's looking for certain things. You know, maybe if they use the word nucleus, it's green. If they don't talk about the nucleus, but they say control center, I can put that in as yellow. So they mentioned something about the idea of the nucleus, but they didn't use the term. That can give me a heads up that they're at least talking about the topic that they should be. You can set that up however you want, and you can put in phrases or just words. You can do numbers. So if you teach math, you'll see one of the ones we're going to go through as a math example. So you can actually put in an exact number so that they can you can see if they're doing the math correctly, and so forth. But conditional formatting allows you to change it whatever colors, those options that are there, with whatever rules you particularly want. And as you play around with these different options, you'll see you can do greater than or equal to, less than equal to. This is great for math assignments. And like I use a lot of these text contains or things like that so that I can look for keywords. Anything else about that particular idea for that assignment? Very basic idea of using the conditional formatting rule. And that's the base for everything else that I do throughout this presentation. So conditional formatting starts it off, and then we use it more and more in a complicated way as we go. Okay, so now there's this idea that, okay, let's say we have all these answers and we have them marked green or green and red or whatever colors you want them to be for correct and not correct. Would you still, if you have 20 questions, would you still have to go through and count up how many greens, how many reds, whatever? And the answer to that is no. Google Sheets can do that for you. So you can count the number of cells that are marked green. So if you put in this first bit.ly, necessarily project the answers yet, but I'll show you how it works in a second. So again, the idea from the first round is if we can turn the cells colors, that would save us the step of having to do that and manually mark them correct or not correct. Then once we have that, can we count them up? And so that you get a number of correct answers so you can get a score. And that's this step is going to work through that idea. Yeah, I have your names hidden too, so that you don't have to worry about it being the one up here if you don't know the answer to something. I made sure those were hidden. The first time I didn't hide them because it didn't. To me, it was like it doesn't really matter what you use. But this one, I didn't want people to be like, oh no, I don't want my name up there with what I know and don't know. So you can hide whatever columns you want in Google Sheets, and I just have those hidden. So I have this equation in that's asking Google Sheets to count colored cells. And so it's going to add up how many of the cells are green. In this case, this person previously had 4. Right now you can see that the ones that came in today don't have any number there. And I'll show you that in a minute. There's 2 ways to do this. There's one that you can get an add-on that was originally free when I first started this. And it was called Power Tools. It's a really great add-on, does a lot of great stuff with it, and not just counting color cells, but that's the one that I use from it. But then they started charging for it, so that's a paid one. The other one I'm gonna point out to you is to do a Google script, which is a little more complicated, but there's a free workaround to get around having to pay for the add-on. The problem with that is it's constantly changing. So every time I do this, it changes. And so the Google scripts don't always stay the same. Google changes the way they do things. On the back end, people that are creating the scripts don't necessarily keep it the same. And so it doesn't always maintain. If you start out like today doing something, it may not work tomorrow even. I mean, it's not very reliable. The add-on is reliable, but that's a paid use. So I'm giving you both options. So I have that formula, and if I just drag the formula down, you'll see. Oh, it didn't count. so what it was doing was, it's when you have, in your formula, I know it might be hard to see where you are, but in your formula it's giving a range of cells. It's giving a range of cells that you're asking it to look for colored cells. And then that final cell, that N32 in this case, is what you're having it reference. So what you want it to do is to look for you want to pick a cell that has the green color and what you want it to look for. So what I must have had there when whatever happened with the formula is it must have been looking at a different cell. So when I changed it to the cell that had the green color, then it counted correctly. So that happened with this one. So that was incorrect. That was saying 2 originally. Now it's saying 8. And if I drag that down, now that it's correct, that should fix those. So now I've had the cells marked correctly, green and white for not correct, and it counted up a score for me. So I didn't have to manually go through and count up how many each student got correct. It's an easy way to see a score in something that I didn't have to give you a multiple choice quiz. I could give you something where you're typing in answers. If you like giving the idea of open-ended, but you still want a fast way to grade, this does that for you. It also, you know, I had things in like, if you said something that wasn't exactly as I put it in, I put in different options for it. So my conditional formatting rules were slightly different. I think Peter Jackson was an example of that. Oh yeah, I just said contains the word Jackson. So that way if someone said Peter Jackson, it marked it correct. If someone just said Jackson as the last name, it marked it correct. If they had put Peter, it wouldn't have marked it correct. So that gave a quick way of grading a quiz that's open-ended. You're typing in the answers, and it counts up the score, so you can just put that score in. This is nice. Like, I know especially I have close to 150 students, so to go through and count up 150 lines of green cells would take forever, and it's just that's really a waste of time when Google Sheets can do that for you. The magic of Google Sheets is that you can actually speed things up and make it easier where you're not wasting your time doing things the sheet itself can do. Any questions about that piece? So again, the add-on was called Power Tools. If you want to do the workaround scripting, we don't have time to do that today, but this is the page for that. So that takes you to a place where you can get the script, and it explains how to do it for getting a color workaround script. So if you know anything about adding a Google script, this would be a spot to go to. If you don't and you want to learn about it, this could also be a spot to go to because it explains all that and you can copy and paste from them. This presentation is also on my website, so you can go back and look at it later if you don't do it now. Alright, so try this one. If you type in this bit.ly, and it's going to ask, you're going to need to make a copy of it, so you can't use the actual one that I have. You're going to make your own copy. By the way, something that I forgot to add about, if you do the add-on piece for the counting, the add-on gives you the formula. So you don't actually have to worry about that piece. If you're not good at putting formulas into Google Sheets, the add-on has that particular formula, and it has a whole bunch of other ones too. So it's not just about counting color cells, but they have lots of formulas and things that you can use if you want to go that direction. So that should have brought you to this assignment. And this is one where you can create an assignment, give this to your students, so you can put this on Schoology or whatever platform you use. If you have one, Google Sheet or Google Classroom, you can have them go onto a link and make a copy like you did. And then when you go through, if you put in the right answer, 2 plus 2 is 4, I hit enter, it marks it as correct. So the student automatically knows that they're right. Not only that, but if you're using that formula of counting up the number of cells, you can have it counting the number correct, and then you can give it the formula to calculate the percentage right away. So I just have the formula there as it's taking this divided by the 5 option, or the 5 cells, and then times 100. So right now, with one question right, I have a 20%. And then if I keep going, each time I do that, hopefully it won't just stay loading. There it goes. It's going to be, it'll tell you the number correct and the percentage. This is nice to show, I know a lot of math teachers. I have good friends that teach math, and anytime we talk technology, they say, oh, I need paper and pencil for math. I need to see them do the math. I need to make sure they can write out the answers. And this is a workaround for that, because you can put an algebra equation in here and have them solve for the variable, and then they can put the answer in, and you can see that they have it right away. If I get it wrong, let's say I do this, it turns it red. So it's really clear for the student that green is right, red is not. Again, that's all conditional formatting. So I told conditional formatting that 4 was the answer, mark it green if they put 4 in there. And if it's not 4, mark it red. So that's what it's doing. And as you go through, it's taking a while probably because of the Wi-Fi, but it will load up and give you a percentage. The nice part is if they submit this, Schoology, whatever program you use, Google Classroom, you can actually go through and just record their percentage. So if you want to get it as a grade, you just take the percentage that ends up here. Hopefully, it's not going to keep doing that for you. It was fine until now.
Does that mean you then have to open every one of the kids' files to see which scores?
Yeah, you would have to open every single one. So that's one drawback to that. I use Schoology, and with Schoology, when you put a Google, some kind of Google document into Schoology, it's real easy just to click on the kid and it brings up their document. So if this is the one page that I have, as I click on each kid, I'll see this right away. That's a simple way. Depending on what you use, it's going to be more complicated. If you don't have a platform, or if you don't have a learning management system, you could give them the link, have them make a copy and share it with you right away. And then I would think the way I would do it is I would have you drag it into a folder and just have all the kids in one folder, and you'd still have to click and open each one. So you're going to have some time there, but you're not going to be searching through, I guess ideally you wouldn't just have 5. I made this specifically for this presentation, but you would probably have more than 5 problems. And so it would be a quicker way to look through to see are they getting the right answers. Any questions about this one? So this used conditional formatting, it used count the color cells, and then I just added in the formula of take this divided by 5 times 100, and then that's the percentage it's calculating. The next one is one that I specifically use in biology, and you'll see how, so that was one I created for here, for the presentations that I do. This next one is one I actually use in my classroom, so it's much more elaborate, and it has a lot more to it. So you'll see how this works in action, how it saves time in the long run. So if you put this bit.ly in, it's going to bring you to an actual assignment that I give my students. that should bring you to this. So biology, Punnett squares, I have to teach Punnett squares, and having students do Punnett squares on paper meant in the past that they would do Punnett squares for, say, for homework or for classwork. They would have to turn it in, I would have to go through and check to make sure they're correct, or we would have to go over it in class. And I thought there has to be a better way to do this. And once I knew about conditional formatting, this is still before I got to my my standards-based grading. As I went through and thought about it, my conditional formatting, if I could get this and apply it to students, this would save that time. So taking the idea that we just looked at in that math example and applying it to Punnett squares. So what the students do is, this is just their overview, it explains what they're doing, it kind of shows them how to do it. And then there's 4 problems that are down at the bottom, each page of the sheet, or each sheet of the Google worksheet here has a Punnett square problem. And so it has them crossing capital B with lowercase b. And as the students plug in those letters, if they're doing it correctly, they'll get that they're doing it right. So now if they do it wrong, it doesn't turn green. So then they know right away, oh, I'm not doing that correctly. So that was like one part of a Punnett square problem that in the past they would do on paper, and they would not have instant feedback. So now the students, when I teach them how to do Punnett squares and I say, all right, go try it on your own, they go right to this document and they do it, and they automatically know I'm doing it correctly because they're seeing green. So there's no guessing, there's no doing it wrong and learning it the wrong way until I go and correct it later. This is automatically showing them whether they're right or wrong. If they keep getting the not turning green, they'll call me over and then I'll see what they're doing incorrectly. So it solves that whole like waiting to know the answer kind of thing. Same thing with when they ask questions about like what is the probability that they will have offspring that are capital B, so that's a 0%. If they say, oh, it's 50% that they're going to have that, that's wrong, so now it's not turning green, so it's incorrect. They put in 100, it's correct, that should be easier. And it does the same thing with the phenotypes, asking them what percentage are going to be white, what percentage are going to be black. That happens across 4 different problems in this particular document. As you're doing that, it's also counting up, I have the formula working down here, so they get 1 point for the Punnett square. Each of the questions they answered so far were worth 1 point. So again, I'm using that counting colored squares to get their points here and calculating their overall percentage. So each sheet I can see what percentage they have on it. Now, to save me even more time, and the real reason I have an overview sheet is that idea of opening every student's document and looking through 4 different sheets would take much longer than I would like. So my overview sheet has the overall grade. So it's pulling the data from each of the 4 sheets into one spot for me. So right now, this student, we only answered a few questions. Right now I earned 4 points out of 24, so I have a 16.66%. If I keep going through my 4 different sheets, and I get it all correct, this will say 100%. Now when I go through and look at my student Google Sheets on Schoology, I just click on each one, and right on this page I can see whether or not they did it correctly. If I see 100%, I know I'm good to go and I don't have to really worry. If I see less than 100%, I can go into the data a little deeper and make sure that, see what's actually happening and keep them from getting 100%. To do this, all I'm saying is it's doing the sum of certain cells on each page. So I know that's, again, kind of hard if I don't magnify it. So, it's saying, like, take the sum of page 1, J16, page 2, J16, page 3, J16, page 4, J16. So it's counting those cells together, summing it, and then I gave it the total points, which I just put there, and then this one's just taking this number divided by this number and timesing by 100 to get the percentage. So pretty basic formula in Sheets, just sum, adding up the different cells. You just got to tell what cells you want it to add. So not just on one page, but on 4 different pages. Any questions about this assignment? This is, okay.
Just real quick, is there a simple way to have that round
This?
percentage?
Yes. If you,
You know what I'm saying? To have it not
instead of
not go-
16.66.
Yeah, just to have it go to either,
Yeah.
I guess, the 17.
Yeah, if you do format, you can go in and like, you can change it to however you like. So you can say like percent. Oh, that didn't work. That's not right. I forget which one of these does that, but one of these should. Maybe not. There is a way. There you go. So under more, I just chose the one that showed just the 0 and that changed it.
And will that transfer over
Into the other sheets?
Yeah.
No, so this is the one that's pulling in from the other sheets.
Oh.
So this is the final grade that they got from the other 4 the other 4 sheets. Yeah. But you could do that same because the other ones are doing the same thing, that decimal point like this.
Right.
So if I did the same thing, if I went format number and then more formats and then I think it was the 0. Yeah. So then now it's doing the 67. And actually, if you do that in your 4 sheets, when it pulls it into the first one, it wouldn't do the decimal anyway. So you would be saving that as well.
I guess my question is that just showing it, or is it actually rounded? You know what I'm saying? Like at one point it's gonna bump it up one number.
Yeah.
At one point, if you were to use the rounded numbers as opposed to the full.
Yeah. It's doing, so it's rounding up like it would, like any above the 0.5, whatever.
Yeah, in other words, when it pulls in those 4 and then shows the final, if they were all rounded up as opposed to rounded,
Yeah.
3 and rounded down.
Right.
Would it wind up kind of bumping it up to the next level, or is it still looking at the 0.666, 0.66 and doing the calculation of that?
It's gonna do this, it's gonna look at the point, now it's not. Now it's looking at the 67.
So whatever you see is what it's going to calculate
Yes.
based on. So that's not just a visual, it's actually.
Right, it's actually what it's calculating.
It's
So
actually calculating.
this is, because what I'm telling the overview to do is to take this number and pull it into the data on that first page. So it's using this number to do what it's doing.
67.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Anything else about this assignment? Alright, so then, how to set it up. So there's a couple different things, actually, no, we can just go to that. There's a couple different things you can do to set these up. So if you create a new sheet, I'll give you just some real quick, like how did I make it look the way that I did. So the one thing that you would need to know to set these up is to do the conditional formatting, which we did on the first assignment. And then the idea of the grading is to count the cells by the color and also to do the percentage and add those formulas in. So those pieces we talked about. But to actually make it look like this, because a Google Sheet doesn't look like that. When you create a new Google Sheet, it's just a bunch of white cells. So like this. So how do I turn that into this? So what I do is you can merge cells. So if I want these 2 rows this way to be merged, I can do format merge cells, and I can say merge all, and it's going to merge them into a block. And now if I want, like the black color that I had in there, if I want that to be black, I can turn it black. If I want my Punnett square, I want them to have different cells, I can merge those. So all I did to make this assignment look the way I did is really merge cells to make bigger blocks, or I expanded the cells by dragging the parameters here. So I could always change that. However I want. Make that look however you like. And then I also added in, to make it look a little bit nicer and to separate things, I put merged columns and rows together and then turn them a different color, in this case black, so that it blacks out and separates different things. So again, looks a little complicated in what it is, but the idea behind it is pretty simple. If you merge cells and you change the colors, you can turn this into whatever you want it to look like. So you can take a standard Google Sheet and really make it look however you like. It takes some time, and it takes some getting used to and playing around with the idea of how you can do it, but you can really make it look how you like. And so when we see a Google Sheet, one of the reasons it's pretty overwhelming is it's all white cells, nothing's filled in, it's an empty space. But if you create a document that looks a certain way for students, when they open it, it's not overwhelming to them. It's like, oh, this looks like a worksheet, or this looks like a Google slide, or this looks like things I'm familiar with, as opposed to this complicated cell that they don't really necessarily know how to use. But it's doing things that you can't do with Google Slides, or you can't do with Google Docs. You can get this to do the math for you so that you're saving yourself time. So you can really create the same thing that you would create in a slide or a Google Doc, but on the back end, it's saving you time.
I probably use more forms than sheets. So is there a way to lock down like the questions, or is really shows how the kids can I'm worried about the questions.
So the simple answer to that is I think there's a way that you can lock that, or not the simple answer. The answer to it is I think there is a way you can lock down certain cells. I've tried that and it gets really complicated. I find that and for me it's way too complicated to do that. I don't really like trying to go that direction. So what I do is I leave it open, and then students, for the most part, are pretty good about it. And if you have access to their sheet, like there's always that one or two students that they'll do that accidentally or on purpose. If you have access to their sheet, you can copy and paste in what you already had. So I can just go into my template, because I always keep a blank template of this, and then I can just paste in a new. If I just copy and paste it, I can paste it into theirs, and then it's back. So I find that is easier than trying to lock them out of things. It just makes it easier on my side of things. It's just faster. These take some time to set up. Then I have a bunch of Punnett square problems like this, different ones, but once I had this, I created a template, and then I just went in and I made copies of it, and then I changed the questions. So I made different genotypes, and I did different, this was about cats, I did different animals and plants and things. So I just mixed it up and made it different each one. But once I had the template, I wasn't sitting there creating what it actually looks like for each one. I made that once and made copies of it, and then the idea was then I just had to go in and plug in new questions, all of this can stay the same really. The answers might change, and I'd have to change that, but I could change this piece and the overview. And then, so that original took me time, but then after that it saved me time. And now I use this every year. So I made this a few years ago and I'm still using it. And so now I don't have to put the time into it. It was once and done. You had a question back there. Did we answer? Okay. That would work too. Yeah, that's a good. I haven't felt the need to do that. Like really, like on my side, I don't know. I can see why that would be beneficial for sure, but for me personally, I haven't really felt the need to do it, so I haven't. Any other questions about setting up the Google assignment? Because you can really do that for like whatever assignment in whatever subject you want. So that's just one example. You saw my math one where I just had the problems, and same idea. I merged some cells, made them a little bigger, did the conditional formatting, and you can really make that look however you like. All right, so gradebook. So this comes down to the grading, standards-based grading. So a number of years ago, I want to say probably about 10 years ago, a colleague and I were interested in standards-based grading, and our district uses the standard approach, traditional, not using standards. They use the traditional grading system. So we went to my colleague and I went to Quakertown School District. At the time, they were doing standards-based grading. They had it rolled out across their district, and they were offering professional development. And we also got to go in with the lead teacher in science and see specific science classrooms of how they were working it. We left there feeling really energized about standards-based grading and how great it was working. Going back to our district, we still didn't have a way to roll it out because there's no easy way to get that into our traditional system. So then in 2016, I went to KTI, Keystone Technology Innovators, and there's a lot of talk about that around here because a bunch of people here from that. And Aaron Sams, who's also here, walking around interviewing people, he was there giving a presentation, and he was talking about how you can't let a traditional system stop you from doing something new. And so I was like, well, I have this Google Sheet knowledge. I wonder if there's a way that I can take standards-based grading in a Google Sheet and then somehow get a percentage or something that I can plug into the traditional system. And so I left KTI in the summer of 2016. It was July. I spent all of August before going back to school developing a grade book. And I went to my principal, I went to my science content leader and said, this is what I'm looking to do. Do you give me permission to do this? They wanted me to talk to higher up, go up to the assistant superintendent. So I scheduled a meeting, and things got crazy, so we didn't have the meeting. And so the school year was well off and running before I got to meet with the assistant superintendent. And so I didn't run it that year after KTI. And so that spring, the assistant superintendent had made a comment and tweeted out about how they admired standards-based grading. And I thought, well, that's all the permission I need, because if you're saying that you support it, then if I do it, you'll support me doing it. So the following year I ran it. And this is what it looks like. And this is using conditional formatting, the counting the cells, all the stuff that we talked about. This is an actual grade book. I just took the kids' names out. So all I did is I put in, say, a standard, whatever assignment I had for that standard, and everything was, all of my assignments were out of 4 points, so that I could do the advanced proficient, and so forth. Let's put the screenshot stuff. And then when they took the assignment, I just, again, through Google Sheets or however I had the assignment set up, I would put in their score. And it would automatically calculate an average for that standard. So I just said, all of this is for this standard, so anything in here I want you to average it. And then what I did is I went into our traditional grade book and I put in this particular standard was one column in my grade book, and I just put in whatever average they had for that. And then there was another standard below that, whatever their average was for that standard, that's what I put in to the grade book. Then I did the same thing for the next one. So I might have, like, I don't know, 6 or 7, 8 different standards in my traditional grade book. So the traditional grade book from the school, online, would have 8 assignments, and they would be the 8 standards or the 6 standards, whatever they were. And then if you went into this document, you would see how that broke down. So this particular case, there was only 1 assignment for that standard. I did a redo. If they retook something, I changed their grade, but I also made sure I kept that as green so I could see that these students made growth. But they were allowed to redo things. The idea of standards-based grading is to show growth. So we were looking for, them moving up along the way if they chose to go back and do things with remediation. So that was the whole idea. So the idea of Google Sheets of how I could take the idea of what I was doing, conditional formatting, counting cells, averaging, using all of those formulas that I use for assignments, I actually applied it to a grade book. and then I plug that grade into the actual traditional system. So the good news is, whenever I do this presentation, I offer a template of that grade book. So if you would like that, if that's something that is interesting to you, does not have the science standards in it. It's blank. The standards are blank, and the students are blank, and everything in the middle is blank. But it will do what mine did. So it will turn colors. If you do 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, it will turn the colors. It will average what you need. It will do all the work for you. It's already set up. So if you would like it, it's yours. I'll make a copy of it. Again, it's completely blank, so you can customize with your assignments, your standards. And as I'm giving you a moment to get into that, I will side note that, or add a note to that. When I switched from the middle school to the high school, I tried to do standards-based grading at the high school level. My first year there, I was like, oh, this was great at the middle school. It went really well. That worked out. So I did like a whole letter home to parents. I showed them how it was working. I gave the students a Google sheet that they kept track of their grades in, so the students were required to keep track of their assignments and their grades so that they could pull up and see why they had a certain average for a standard. Everything was really smooth. It ran really well, and I had that going. And then I transferred to the high school because I wanted to change, and so I took it to the high school. And the first time that I ran it with high school students, brand new to 9th graders, they saw that everything was worth 4 points, and they were like, I'm not doing this, it's only 4 points. And I had no idea I was going to face that because I had never taught, I taught high school for a short period, years before that. But in that moment, I was like, okay. So they would refuse to do things. So like, it's only 4 points, I don't have to do this. I was like, but everything, and I tried, everything's out of 4 points, it didn't matter. So I had to scrap my standards-based grading my first year. I got about a month and a half into the school year and realized it was not working, and so I scrapped it. And I thought, okay, I got to think of a better way to do this. And so that was last year at the high school level. This year, I had hoped to try again because I had the idea, instead of doing everything out of 4, I'll just make everything out of 40, and they'll think that it's worth more. However, with my crazy life that came between that time, I did not have time to go back in and change all of my formulas and things to be out of 40. So this year I'm not running standards-based grading either. It is on my radar to make it successful at the high school. I am just not able to do that yet. But it worked wonderfully at the middle school level, and I had really no issues. Any minor things that popped up were smoothed over very easily, and the students liked it because they saw it as they could show growth. The parents at first were resistant to it because they didn't understand the whole idea, but as I explained it more and they saw that kids were making growth and that they were actually learning and that it actually applied to what they were doing, that was fine. So middle school level, I found a lot of success. High school level, haven't been able to do that yet, but I'm working on figuring out ways to make that better. Questions about the grade book or standards-based grading or anything like that? If you are a high school teacher and you use it, I would love to hear how you make that work, especially if your district doesn't do it as a whole. That would be interesting to hear. I know some districts do it, and that's different than if you're like the lone person doing it, which is where I'm kind of at. There is a high school teacher in our district that's at the other high school that's doing it this year, and I just spoke with her, and she was finding success with it. So I'm going to have more conversation with her to see exactly what she's doing to make it more successful at the high school. Okay. We're good? So, there's even more that Google Sheets can do for you. Oops. So I'll show you some complicated stuff that it can do. So what I did, we had to do some diversity of life. It's a very, very quick piece of biology, and so it's just like introduce students to different living things, like all the different kingdoms and phyla. So I thought, a colleague and I went through and we did stations, and we set up different stations in our 2 rooms, and we had all kinds of specimens out. We did just to get kids through the kingdoms and phyla really quickly. And so they moved around, and it took us 3 days, but they moved around the different stations in the 2 rooms, And we gave them Google Forms. And I know someone said that they used Google Forms, and maybe many of you do. But we actually gave them Google Forms with questions about the station. So it was asking them things about the different kingdoms and phyla that they had to look up in textbooks or at whatever resources we had there for them. So we had a total of 16, I believe, 16 stations. And those Google Forms, all 16 Google Forms, there's one different one for each station, we're feeding into this one Google sheet. So there were all different stations here. So I have all the different kingdoms and phyla, domains, so forth. Yeah, 16. So they went through, they answered. It populated the same thing. It was counting, it was getting numbers, doing all the stuff that we talked about so far. But I was still thinking this is not a good way that's not very organized. Going through, this comes back to looking at 16 different sheets and trying to see the data and see where they're at with all the different groups. So what I did is I used a search for feature in Google Sheets. And instead of having to go through each of the 16 different sheets, I pulled in all of that data into one sheet. So I had all my 16 stations at the top, and then it went through and it looked for a certain student's data and pulled in whatever their score was for that station. And then over here was calculating their actual score for all 16 stations together. So I could say, again, this was standards-based grading at the middle school level. It was showing me that they were getting whatever score they were getting at that point. So I did that for each of my sections. So they were all purple in that one, but then they get more colorful in some of the others. There's another all purple. But like this one, I could easily see which kids were struggling at which particular station. And so it was pulling, that was in live time. So as soon as they finished and submitted a Google form, it would populate in that other Google sheet, and this one would pull that information in here, and I could see, oh, he just finished station 4 and he did very poorly. So now I need to check in what's going on with him with station 4. So it gave me that fast feedback. For this, I was using a formula called VLOOKUP. This one's much more complicated formula, but it was saying to look up a certain cell that I wanted to have and pull in a range from this is the sheet that it was pulling from and what range it was pulling in. So it was telling me to pull in certain information. The one thing that I learned by doing this, and this is a tip that I give out when I do this, is I had it looking by student last name. So it was searching B3, which I have hidden, but B3 was the last name. And what I learned, originally it was searching B2, which was the last name. And what I learned is when I actually had siblings in my classes. And so what it was doing is it was pulling the other siblings' data into their other siblings' information here. So I was getting the wrong scores if I had siblings. So instead, what I realized is that it was collecting their email addresses. So instead, I changed it to look for the email address because each of those were different. So that's what I ended up learning by doing this. At first, I made that mistake, but I caught it and then I fixed it. So the email addresses solved that problem, but it was pulling in their data and I could easily see how they were doing very quickly. This saved me a ton of time. It was, again, putting putting some time into it ahead of time, starting out. So before when we designed the station, when we designed the Google Sheet, I put all this in, but then in that moment when the students were doing it, I wasn't doing any of that data on the back end. It was doing this for me. So all I had to do was have my computer open and I could see in that moment what they were scoring and how they were doing. So it saved me I have to go through and check all 16 stations and see how they're doing. I didn't have to do any of that. So yeah, it took me some time to set up, but it saved me the looking through 16 different stations, 150 different answers of each question at each station would have taken forever. This was definitely faster than that, for sure. And I can use it again and again. So the idea for this is it can save you time if you can get the formulas in and do all of that. It takes some learning, and it did not happen overnight. For me, this was a number of years in the making. It wasn't like a 1 year thing. So I have for you tips for grading with Google Sheets. If you put in this bit.ly, it's a document that has a lot of the stuff that I talked about and how to do it. So it has the formulas, it has some of the things I said, it has in writing, like about doing conditional formatting, describing how to merge cells. It talks about a lot of that. So I didn't give you instructions in writing throughout the presentation, but if you take this document, it has that. And I'll show you what that document looks like quickly. I know we're running out of time. So this is what it looks like. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we talked about today. The add-ons, it talks about how to crop your sheets. It talks about conditional formatting, how to do it. I even do the pictures of how you get to it. It talks about how to do counting the cells. So if you don't do the Power Tools add-on, which I have there for you, I also have the free script for you, and also the link in the presentation. Again, that changes, so that may not be successful depending. There's other formulas here for you. Customizing your look, so when we talked about how to make it look the way you want, talking about cropping it, merging it, coloring the cells, inserting images, things like that, all of that stuff to make it look the way you want is in here and how to do it. Other useful functions, like how to average some of the ones that I was using in my different assignments are all here. So I saved you the headache of having to figure out what formula it is. They're all here for you. So it's, what do you want to do? Here's the formula for it. And then the highlights are what you might change. So depending on what your range is, you'll change your numbers or so forth. Then more complex, to do the VLOOKUP, to do that crazy diversity of life thing that I had. Here's how I did that. Here's the formula for that. It explains a little bit more about it. So everything that I talked about, there's a couple page document that explains each thing in more detail. That way you can look at it and go back to it if you need to. Any questions or comments before we wrap it up? Okay, well, thank you for choosing to spend your time here with me today. I appreciate it. I know time is valuable, and so the fact that you chose to be here means something to me. So I hope that this was valuable to you and you don't feel like you wasted your time. If you have any questions or anything along the way, you can certainly email me or message me on Twitter or anything like that. I'm certainly open to that idea as well. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great rest of your day.